nobody was checking ID cards very much when it came for the bars and other similar activities.
Well, I'm sure you only had to be 18 to drink in Tijuana back when you were in the Navy.
I guess that was true because I don't remember anybody, at least I wasn't 21. Let's put it that way.
Talking with famous people.
And most of my buddies, when we went down there, weren't 21. Some of the older guys were, but there was never anybody checking on.
Is that because you were stationed in San Diego?
Well, okay, I was not. The ship I was on did their run-up cruise out of San Diego. We were stationed in Pearl.
Okay, so you started at Pearl Harbor?
When we were transferred to the Pacific Fleet. But the ship had just come out of the refit up in Vallejo. And then we came down to San Diego and we did, before they put a ship into the fleet, you had to run it up, and that meant you had to go out and gunnery practice, you had to do fire drill, we had to do man overboard, we did oiling. I didn't do all of that stuff, but the ship had to go through and pass inspection in terms of the ability of the ship to perform its mission. And
what was your job?
I was a fire control technician. I was one of the guys that was in charge of aiming the guns, as it were. So,
what made you want to go into the Navy instead of like the Army or the Marines or the Air Force?
there was a teacher who was a reserve naval officer, and he had decided that some of us would be good Navy material, and there wasn't any Army guy around. So we, a couple, three of us, joined the Navy and the Navy Reserve.
And most of your class joined the military, right?
Well, one of either went to the service. The men, boys, either went to service or to college, ROTC or something. It was just universal. That's what you did. And
was there a draft?
I don't think so at that time. I joined in '54.
So you graduated in high school in '54?
I'm sorry?
So is that when you graduated from high school, '54?
No, I graduated in '55, but I was in the service at '54, and my reserve unit, and then I transferred to active duty, and I did 4 years active duty.
And was that during Korea?
Yeah, I was in Korea. I was not in Korea, off Korea. We had Korea patrol twice.
And did you shoot guns at Korea?
No, the ceasefire was in '53.
Oh.
Time I got there, there was the stalemate we're talking about today. But we did Korea patrol, which meant that we were, the history was that the North Koreans, even at that time, sent out these little gunboats. And and then there was also the MiG aircraft. You may remember the MiG-15, but probably not. The 15 and the Sabre jets and the Phantom jets used to mix it up over Korea at 50 to 53. But the Chinese or the Russians had pretty well outfitted the North Koreans with the MiG-15, which was certainly an equivalent to the Sabre jet at that time. One of the famous movies was The Bridges of Tokyo-ri, which was about the bombing campaign in North Korea. in
Oh,
part.
yeah.
But what we did, we had to go, I stood dawn, but we all did, dawn patrol and dusk patrol. In addition to what you were doing in your regular day, we had to be out there prior to dawn and from prior to dusk until they figured it was okay, because those would have been the favorite times had we been attacked, which we weren't, but the Navy had issued us really cool alpaca jackets.
Do you still have yours?
No, that's the one thing when we tried to get off the ship that they
Wouldn't let you take?
really were down on. They were very nice jackets. Would have not minded having one, but they do that.
Huh.
So we were in Japan. The whole idea was that we would be 2 weeks in Japan, then 2 weeks on patrol. And there were 4 destroyers in our division. And I was on the Bradford, DD 545, and the Bass was our companion ship that went out with us. And then there were 2 others whose name I don't remember, who came into port for 2 weeks.
So did you have shore leave in Japan?
Sorry?
Did you have shore leave in Japan?
Yeah. Once we got the ship secured, I was a junior petty officer. And so we would have to stand quarterdeck watches and stuff. But they would give port and starboard, that would be 2-section watches. Sometimes, well, anyway, there's a very good friend and I who used to take off, go ride a train. We went to a ryokan, which was a Japanese traditional hotel. We went and saw the great Buddha, Daibutsu. We were out of Yokosuka. My brother-in-law, Lonnie, ended up, I think, a year plus in Japan, where he was assigned.
So how did the Japanese people take to Americans, given the fact that we had just nuked them not that long ago?
This was about, I suppose, 13 years after the war.
Okay.
And we were always treated politely. The kids were more curious than anything. They would come over and sort of look at us. We had to wear our uniforms. We were not allowed civilian clothes like they are today. So we were in uniform every time we went to any place. But my buddy and I would get on the train and we'd go if we had a 48 or a 72-hour pass. And we went to, what's the name of the, well, anyway, we also, I had met a young lady with cancer who claimed she had been at Nagasaki when the bomb went off. So I guess she wasn't so young at the time. But, so that, she claimed that that's where she had been.
Did a lot of Japanese people speak English?
I'm sorry?
Did a lot of the Japanese speak English?
The Japan of then, one of my favorite stories, and it's there was a sections of Yokosuka where the GIs had sort of settled in. I'm saying GI of there was the shore-based people, but there were clubs. There were a section where the bars, clubs, which was where most of the people ended up at the time. And that was pretty well known. That was where a lot of the other activities went on. So anyway, a buddy and I were off the ship out there. It was a jazz club that they had records. A lot of the black guys went there, and we were sort of welcomed there. But you know, we went in very carefully, and that it was okay. But we had come out of the club, and the shore patrol had armbands and a baton that they were issued. They had no training. I told shore patrol in Naples. But anyway, there's this guy coming down the street, and these two shore patrol guys are hot on his tail. And he's looking over his shoulder, and in those days, there were still open storage dishes called benjo, or toilet benjo dishes. So this guy, he sails right off the edge of this, into this thing. And, so here come the SPs, and they come running down there, and they stop. And they look, and they turn around and walk right on back up the street. So, you and I, my buddy and I, we said, oh, okay, we just walk on back ourselves.
So what would have happened to him if he gets busted by shore patrol? What happens?
Yeah, well, then you got, usually you got extra duty. You go back to the ship, and you had to stand a captain's mast, or you went up to see the one of the division officers, and they said, okay, they could, if it's a serious offense, they could bust you. That means it would reduce you in rank, fine you, give you 10 hours of extra duty, confine you to the ship, or on occasion, fine you to the brig, the naval jail. So, which was not on the ship in this case, but it would have been one of the onshore facilities. So that was basically what we did. Career patrol was basically boring, and
so what got you in trouble? Like, what did shore patrol? What were they out there looking for?
Given your superior petty officer a bunch of crap. One thing you didn't want to do was fall asleep on watch, but we only got 4 or 5 hours sleep a night because of the watch schedule when we were at sea. In port it wasn't bad because a lot of the watches, the underway watches, would change. But if you had, and I don't want to go through all that, but if insubordination, and if you really screwed up your duty, that, well, okay, the ships had to compete in efficiency. So there would be an exercise, and they had a big E painted up on someplace up on around the bridge or something.
And it stood for efficiency?
So if you went in and did something really dumb, and I can't figure out exactly what that would be, then there would be, you'd be in some sort of trouble. And I'm talking about in terms of your work, that affected the efficiency of the ship. That was a big no-no.
So you got seasick, right?
I'm sorry?
You were seasick in the Navy, right?
I was seasick the whole time. Until we got to the South Pacific. And we were also assigned at one point. Now, we were out of Pearl. So I was there for statehood. I was sitting on they wouldn't let us off the ship when the statehood.
Why you became
It
a
was
state?
1958, if I remember correctly.
Why didn't they let you off the ship?
Well, what we had to do, they issued us flare guns. And so I was given a number of rounds of my flare gun, and we pulled out, we may have been in helo, but we pulled out, and we stood off the shore. I believe it was right off of Oahu, but I can't remember exactly. And you pop in your flare gun and you go, poof. and that was how we celebrated. They wouldn't let us off. I don't know if the entire naval base there was shut down pretty well, but I guess they didn't want a whole bunch of drunk sailors
Probably.
running around Honolulu. There was a section then of Honolulu where the sailors went, and if we got a 72-hour pass in Honolulu, we would go to the YMCA. And that was my first experience with guava juice, and I thought that was the best stuff ever invented.
It is.
Yeah.
I think it is the best stuff ever invented.
So we go there. There was an officer section, an enlisted section. There was a little jazz club that I say jazz and figuratively speaking there, but it was okay. That we would go down and hang out at. That was our main.
Now, when your time in the Navy was up, you said, "See you later, Navy," but you weren't done with the military.
When my time in the Navy was up, and that's one of the turning points, and I think when decisions were made. I had an opportunity to take my discharge, or my separation, I should say, in Honolulu, in Hawaii, and I was too young and I didn't really know enough, but the opportunities were still there in real estate. This is 2020 hindsight, and I had well, anyway, long story short, I would have transferred into the reserve section on Pearl Harbor. And we didn't, I didn't, and when I came back I chose to get separated out of San Diego. And then I came north to Los Angeles.
But when did you go to Europe?
Well, I went to a year of college
In Los
at
Angeles.
Los Angeles City College, and was just basically not doing very well in terms of eating. I wasn't able to, it didn't work and study very well. I had very poor grades, and just trying to make a living, I had to work nights, and it just didn't get done. So I just said at one point, screw it.
What did you do for work?
Huh?
What did you do as work?
I worked for a company called Dun & Bradstreet, which is a credit rating firm, and I was the one and a number of other guys, who refiled. In those days it was all paper, and it was even much before IBM cards. So it all had to be done by hand, and we had to file all
So you
these.
were a filer.
Yeah.
That was my first job, was a filer at the Buick dealership down there in Arcadia. Before it became claim jumper.
So that was usually from 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to 12, depending on the number of files you had to make. Then I'd get home, I had to take the bus, and I lived in I guess there were 5 or 6 or 7 of us that rented a house, and everybody pitched in, and we had a communal food.
And so many things
Didn't work
are
very well.
different than they were.
So I said, screw this.
Hold on a second, Dad. Communal food didn't work very well? Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.
But sometimes I would be after the day and people would come and they'd say, oh, what did you do today? I'm like, just shut up.
So you go back into the military at that point?
I decided that at that point, I had just thinking, this is not going to work very well. So I went down to the Army recruiter and I said, okay, here's the deal. What can you do for me? And he said, okay, we're going to reduce you 1 rank, but we'll give you the guarantee of where you want to go. And I said, okay. I want to go, I said, I was in the gunnery. I said, I'd like to go back into the artillery. So I went through basic training as an E3, not an E4, not a.
Do they have Navy basic training?
I'm sorry?
Did they have Navy basic training?
A Navy base.
Yeah, do they have a Navy basic training?
I'm not understanding the question.
Do they have basic training?
Oh, basic training was at Fort Ord.
But do they have it in the Navy too, or just the Army?
Oh, no. I went through Navy Basic in Bainbridge, Maryland. And they have a fake ship.
Oh, okay.
And then you go and you do fake ship stuff.
Oh, okay.
And you have a petty officer that runs you around in formation, you know, the usual. They break you to make you, is what they always say.
So which was worse, Army basic or Navy basic?
Army Basic was a breeze because I'd been through, the only difference, I had a rifle instead of a 40mm cannon. And it was a breeze. I made squad leader, you know, I was one of the older guys, obviously. And so, yeah. And I was then, I graduated pretty high in my class. The last exercise, we had a 3-day maneuver against the forces, blue forces, red forces, and this is not political, but we had to go out, get in trenches and charge with the bayonet and shoot blank rounds at each other, and I thought it was enormous fun.
I
Not
was going to
everybody.
say, you never did, because every time we get going in the evening,
Not,
oh, you know who's here tonight?
So did your team win, Dad?
I really don't know. It was, they have guys running around with armbands who are referees. You're dead, you're not, you know, it's one of those things. So, you know, you could end up lying down, you could be a casualty, and then a medic could come over and slap a bandage on you. I mean, you know, it was all of that stuff, and we had a night exercise. We had to go fight a night battle. Anyway, next thing you know, I'm in Fort Sill with the artillery school. And as long as you're doing all this, I don't know if you've ever heard any of this.
No, I've heard little bits and pieces, but I've not heard the actual progression of events. So
All right.
because eventually you end up in the Army band, right?
Well, okay, I'll get there in a minute. I'm in artillery school, and I'm stationed kind of permanently in the artillery field there. I was taking some courses at night. That was just something that was going on. I had, believe it or not, brought my French horn. I had bought it in Atlanta, Georgia, and brought it in back to Fort Sill. I had my French horn. So, and there was a band in Fort Sill as well. I mean, an Army band was stationed there, but I was not in it. I was in the artillery. We were out, again, learning to shoot the
fake end.
105 millimeters and et cetera, et cetera. So there was a group of officers and enlisted wives and so forth who would put on, and actually GIs too, who would put on plays on the base. Now the base is in Lawton, and you want to know what the middle of nowhere was. This is, the prairie dogs outnumber the people out there, but it's a good place for an artillery base because you can go shoot your gun once in a while. Or weapon, I shouldn't say gun. And so anyway, they would have these musicals, and somebody told me that they're having they didn't want me practicing for some reason, you know. in the barracks. So they said that there's this my liver's not too good. But anyway, I went down and said, hey, I'd like to play in the pit, in the orchestra. So in the orchestra, we did Oklahoma, obviously. I don't remember, about 3 or 4 other musicals that were put on by a lot like Jane's high school musicals. So finally I was playing French horn, and there were other French horn players. And so one of the guys said, after some time, he said, why don't you come over and see our CO in the band and see if maybe you'd like to join the band. And so I went over, and the CO said, okay, I'll give you an audition. And I passed the audition, and he went over to my CO and said, I'd like to have this guy. And the guy said, okay, he's...
I don't care about David Strauss, you're welcome to have him.
So then I was in the band at Fort Sill, I guess, for about 6 months, 8 months. And did band things, and I got better because I was back in the practice again.
And so then they made you, they said, okay, now when the CO talked to their CO, that means somewhere in the offices they changed your designation from artillery to band?
Artillery is still my primary MOS, my medical occupation specialty. I'm sorry, military occupational specialty. And my secondary MOS is bandsman.
Okay.
So in case of had I stayed in through the, when we got out, Vietnam was just starting to roll up. And had the Army so wished, because the band was dispersed when de Gaulle kicked us out of France, they could have sent me to Nam as an artillery. Now I was E5, so that wouldn't have been too bad. But
what does E5 mean?
Buck sergeant.
Okay, so not a regular private.
Well, no, I would have been a non-commissioned officer.
Okay.
And SEAL. So that was the progression of how we got there.
All right, that was fantastic, excellent. Let's take a break. I want to go smoke a cigarette.
Talking with famous people.